They didn't surrender because they were outnumbered. They surrendered because they couldn't stop staring. In 1943, when American jeeps appeared on the hills of Sicily, something strange happened. Italian soldiers, hungry, tired, trapped in a war they no longer believed in, saw machines that seemed alive, machines that moved like wind over stone, that defied every law of warfare they had known. For years, they had marched beside mules. Their trucks broke down more often than they ran. Their boots wore through faster than supplies could replace them. Now the enemy arrived, driving the future. Dust swirled gold in the Sicilian sun. The convoy rolled over the crest of the hill with a sound that didn't belong to war. Not the scream of bombs or the thunder of tanks, but something lighter. A hum, a purr, the sound of confidence itself. An Italian outpost watched in stunned silence as those small, open vehicles descended toward them, dancing over terrain that should have stopped them cold. One soldier would later write home, "We saw them and knew. The world had changed, and we had been left behind." Act 1. The old world crumbles. War of another century. Long before the jeeps came, there was only dust and disappointment. The Italian army of 1943 was a ghost of imperial ambition, a force built on rhetoric and nostalgia rather than steel and oil. While Mussolini's propaganda machine churned out images of gleaming tanks and modern warriors, the reality on the ground was something else entirely, something older, slower, sadder. Picture an Italian supply column in North Africa, early 1942. Mules outnumber vehicles 3-1. The trucks that do exist are temperamental relics, their engines coughing black smoke, their frames rattling over rocks. Spare parts are dreams. Fuel is rationed to the point of paralysis. One battalion shares 2 functional motorcycles between 300 men. The soldiers themselves carry rifles designed in 1891. Some are stamped with dates from the previous World War, artifacts inherited, not chosen. Their uniforms fray in the heat. Their boots crack and split. They march, always marching, across landscapes that swallow hope. At night, around small fires, they don't speak of victory, they speak of home, of bread, of sweethearts and whether the olive harvest will be good this year. Sergeant Antonio Mora writes in his diary, June 1942, "We are told we fight for glory, but glory doesn't fill your stomach. Glory doesn't carry your pack when you can barely stand." The commanders still quote Roman legions. They invoke Caesar and ancient triumph. But the men know better. They've seen the supply lines break. They've watched their friends die not from bullets, but from disease, exhaustion, bureaucratic neglect. They've learned that wars are won by logistics, not legacy. The illusion of pride. The posters are everywhere, plastered on walls in Rome, Naples, Palermo. Bold graphics, strong angles, men with jutting chins and steely gazes. Italy marches on wheels of steel. The fascist machine is unstoppable. But propaganda cannot fuel a truck. It cannot repair a crankshaft or produce rubber for tires. It cannot make up for an industrial base decades behind its enemies. The truth is this: Italian military vehicles in 1943 are, with few exceptions, obsolete. The Fiat 508, their primary light vehicle, is essentially a modified civilian car. It struggles on paved roads, let alone battlefields. The heavier trucks sink in sand, overheat in summer, freeze in winter. Mobility, that crucial advantage in modern war, is something they read about, not something they possess. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, the Allies are building an entirely different kind of army. In Detroit, River Rouge, and Toledo, assembly lines run 24 hours a day. Factories that once made tractors and automobiles now produce weapons of liberation. Not just tanks and planes, but something smaller, something revolutionary. A quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle, nimble, reliable, designed by committee, but perfected by necessity. The Italian soldiers don't know it yet, but the real steel is already coming, not from Krupp factories or Fiat plants, but from America's heartland, from the hands of workers who've never seen war, but understand motion, efficiency, freedom. The wheels are turning, and they're heading south. The waiting. Sicily, July 1943. Heat presses down like a physical weight. Flies swarm around anything that doesn't move. The air tastes of salt and stone, and the particular emptiness that comes before something breaks. A small Italian outpost sits on a hillside overlooking the coastal road. 23 men, 1 officer, a machine gun that jams more often than it fires, rations for 3 days that need to stretch to 7. Private Giuseppe Rossi sits in the shade of a dying olive tree, cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that day. Not because it needs it, but because it gives his hands something to do besides shake. They're coming, someone says. No one needs to ask who. The invasion is inevitable now. Everyone knows it. Radio broadcasts speak of readiness and defiance, but the men can feel the truth in their bones. The Allies own the sea, they own the air. Soon they'll own the island. Corporal De Luca, a Sicilian himself, spits into the dust. If the Americans have cars, let them drive here. We'll shoot their tires. A few men laugh. The sound is hollow. Lieutenant Battaglia doesn't laugh. He's 24 years old and already tired in a way sleep cannot fix. That night they hear the bombers, distant thunder rolling across the sky. Not their thunder, someone else's. Rossi writes a letter he won't mail. Dear Mama, I am afraid. Not of dying, but of what happens after. The world is changing, and I don't know where I fit in it anymore. He doesn't know how right he is. None of them do. The future is already on the road. It's crossing the water in landing craft, packed tight and ready to roll. It sounds like nothing they've ever heard. And when it arrives, it will break more than their lines. It will break their understanding of what war can be. Act 2. The arrival of the Jeep. Engines in the distance. The morning of July 12th breaks clear and merciless. Rossi is on watch when he hears it. At first, he thinks it's insects, a strange mechanical buzzing carried on the wind. Then louder. Not the grinding roar of tanks or the whine of aircraft, but something else, something multiple and strangely rhythmic. Engines. He signals to the others. They grab binoculars, squint toward the valley below. The dust comes first, plumes of it rising from the road like signals. Then shapes emerge. Small, fast. Too small to be trucks, too fast to be anything they recognize. Tanks? De Luca asks. No, Battaglia whispers, eye pressed to binoculars. No, they're like cars. Open cars. In a war? The lieutenant trails off, watching. The vehicles pour over a distant rise, one after another. 6, 10, 15. They move in loose formation, darting left and right with an agility that seems impossible. They're not following the road so much as playing with it, cutting across fields, navigating around obstacles, moving like water finding its level. One of them hits a bump and catches air. Just for a second, all four wheels leave the ground. The soldiers watching gasp. When it lands, it doesn't slow down, doesn't hesitate. It just keeps going. "Madonna," someone breathes. Rossi lowers his binoculars. His hands are trembling. They look like toys. But toys don't sound like that. Toys don't kick up that much dust. Toys don't carry men with rifles and radio equipment and the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing you can go anywhere, do anything, leave whenever you choose. These aren't toys. They're freedom on wheels. The encounter. The Jeeps burst onto the scene like actors who've missed their cue and decided to make up for it with enthusiasm. They don't advance in careful formation. They don't pause to scout or establish defensive positions. They simply arrive, a controlled chaos of motion and noise that makes the Italian outposts' static defenses look like artifacts from another era, which in a sense they are. The lead vehicle stops about 200 meters out. The driver, a young American with sleeves rolled up and a cigarette dangling from his lips, steps out like he's parking at a grocery store. He stretches, looks around, waves to his buddies. Someone is laughing. In the middle of a battlefield, someone is laughing. Battaglia watches through binoculars, his tactical training at war with his simple human astonishment. According to everything he learned at the academy, this is wrong. Soldiers should be disciplined, cautious, aware of their vulnerability. These men act like they've already won. Another Jeep rolls up beside the first. The driver pulls out a canteen, takes a long drink, then pours some over his head. His companion says something. The words don't carry, but the tone does. It's a joke. The first man shoves him playfully. Rossi, watching beside his lieutenant, whispers, "They move like no army I've ever seen." He's right. There's no shouting, no rigid hierarchy of visible command, just movement, smooth, efficient, utterly relaxed. They move like men who trust their machines, their training, and each other. Like men who have never had to march beside mules or push a truck out of sand, or watch half their unit die from dysentery because medical supplies couldn't get through. Like men from a different world. A third Jeep circles around the flank, engine purring. It shouldn't be able to handle that terrain, too rocky, too uneven, but it does. It glides over obstacles that would break an Italian Fiat's axle. "What do they run on?" DeLuca asks, and it's not entirely clear whether he means fuel or magic. The Americans set up a radio. Someone unfolds a map on the hood of a Jeep, pointing, discussing. They're not in a hurry. They're not afraid. And slowly, terribly, the Italian soldiers realize something. These men aren't just winning because they have more soldiers or bigger guns. They're winning because they have this, because they can move, because the battlefield isn't a fixed location for them. It's wherever they decide to go. Warfare has changed, and the old rules no longer apply. The surrender. It starts with Corporal DeLuca doing something stupid, or brave, or both. He stands up, slowly, hands visible, and starts walking down the hill toward the American position. No weapon, no strategy, just walking. "DeLuca!" Battaglia hisses. "What are you doing?" The corporal doesn't answer, doesn't look back. Rossi understands, though. He sees it in the way DeLuca walks, not with fear or shame, but with something like curiosity, like a child approaching a mysterious stranger. The Americans spot him. Rifles swing toward him, then lower when they see he's unarmed. One of them calls out in mangled Italian, "You, stop! Surrender, yes?" DeLuca stops about 20 meters away, raises his hands higher. Then, in the broken English picked up from radio broadcasts and captured newspapers, he says, "The car! "Can I see, please?" For a moment, nobody moves. Then one of the Americans, a tall man with a broad smile, laughs, not mockingly, just amused, pleased even. He gestures DeLuca forward. "Come on, come look." DeLuca approaches the Jeep like it's a holy relic. He touches the hood gently, runs his hand along the fender. The metal is warm from the sun and the engine, real, solid, undeniably there. "This," he says in Italian, forgetting himself, "this is what we're fighting?" The tall American doesn't understand the words, but gets the meaning. He grins wider, pats the Jeep's side proudly. "Best damn vehicle in the world, buddy. Want a ride?" Behind him, up the hill, the rest of the Italian unit watches as DeLuca climbs into the passenger seat, watches as the American fires up the engine, that gorgeous, healthy sound, watches as they drive in a quick circle, DeLuca holding on to his helmet, face split in a grin that erases 3 years of war. When they return, DeLuca climbs out. He looks back up the hill at his unit. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. One by one, the Italians stand. They set down their rifles. They start walking down the hill. Not because they're outnumbered, not because they're afraid, because they've seen what the future looks like, and their past can't compete. Lieutenant Battaglia is the last to descend. He carries his sidearm in one hand, barrel pointed at the ground. When he reaches the Americans, he holds it out, grip first, formal and correct. The tall American takes it, nods respectfully. Then he gestures to the Jeeps. "You guys want a lift to the processing area? It's hot as hell walking." Battaglia looks at his men already climbing into the vehicles, touching the metal, asking questions in broken English. He looks at the Jeep that will carry him into captivity, and he smiles. Just a little. Years later, he'll write in his memoir, "We were not defeated that day by superior force. We were defeated by superior motion, by the simple, devastating reality that while we were still in the 19th century, our enemy had leapt fully into the 20th. They were not fighting men. They were men who had seen a miracle and who drove it wherever they pleased. That day, dozens surrendered not to an army, but to a machine, and what it represented. A world where everything worked." Act 3. The Myth of Mobility. Built for everything. 60 hours. That's how long it took American engineers to design the first prototype Jeep in 1940. 60 hours from contract to rolling vehicle. The Army had given 3 companies an impossible challenge: build a quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle that could go anywhere, carry anything, survive everything. It had to be light enough to maneuver, tough enough to abuse, simple enough for any soldier to maintain, versatile enough for 1,000 uses. Oh, and they needed it immediately. In Germany, such a request would have triggered committees, feasibility studies, years of development. In Italy, it would have been lost in bureaucracy. In America, it became a Wednesday afternoon problem. Willis Overland and Ford got to work. They borrowed from tractors, stripped down civilian cars, welded together ideas until something new emerged. Not beautiful, never beautiful, but profoundly right. 4-wheel drive, high ground clearance, 3 seats, a hood that could serve as a desk, minimal weight, maximum function. The Jeep wasn't designed, it was distilled. When the first models rolled off the line, Army testers tried to break them. They drove them off cliffs, through rivers, up stairs, across railroad ties. They loaded them with twice their rated weight. They ran them until they ran out of gas, then pushed them further. The Jeeps kept going. By 1943, America was producing them at a rate that would have seemed fictional to access planners. Willis and Ford together, 640,000 units over 4 years. That's roughly one Jeep every 90 seconds around the clock for the entire war. It wasn't the most powerful vehicle in the war. German tanks could crush it. It wasn't the fastest. Motorcycles could outrun it. It wasn't the most protected. A rifle bullet could kill its occupants. But it could go anywhere. And in war, everywhere is where you need to be. The design philosophy was quintessentially American, democratic, pragmatic, improvisational. No single genius created it. Thousands of workers built it. Millions of hands touched its parts. It was made in factories where women welded steel and men who'd never seen combat assembled weapons of liberation. The Axis powers had built armies around singular visions, the Tiger tank, the Zero fighter. Impressive machines, certainly, but specific, inflexible. The Jeep was different. It was whatever you needed it to be. Ambulance, supply truck, scout car, gun platform, communications hub, command post, troop transport, taxi, escape vehicle, battering ram. One soldier in France rigged his Jeep with a circular saw to cut through hedgerows. Another in Italy mounted a makeshift espresso machine. A third used his to herd sheep away from a minefield. The Jeep adapted because America adapted, because democracy, for all its messiness, excels at one thing: making 1,000 small solutions work together. While Germany perfected the art of the single perfect weapon, America mastered the logistics of good enough, everywhere, all the time. And good enough, it turned out, was more than sufficient. Psychological warfare of wonder. The stories spread faster than the vehicles themselves. In German-held Freiats, whispered conversations. The Americans have cars that can climb walls. In North Africa, rumors among Italian survivors. They have machines that never break down. Neither was literally true, of course. Jeeps couldn't defy physics. They broke down like any vehicle. But the myth mattered more than the reality, because the myth was psychologically accurate. Private Hans Müller, German Army, writes to a sister from Italy, September 1943. You hear them before you see them, that engine sound. It's everywhere, behind you, to your flanks. They appear, shoot, and vanish before we can respond. It's like fighting ghosts, very loud, very fast ghosts. The sound itself became a weapon. That distinctive purr of a Jeep engine multiplied across a battlefield created an auditory landscape of omnipresence. You couldn't see them all, you couldn't track them all, but you could hear them, everywhere at once, a constant reminder that the enemy could move, and you couldn't. Morale is a fragile thing. It breaks not just from casualties but from hopelessness. And what's more hopeless than fighting an enemy who can be anywhere while you're stuck in place? Italian commanders tried to counter the Jeep's psychological impact. They told their men the vehicles were fragile, easily destroyed. They pointed out, correctly, that Jeeps had no armor, that a good shot could disable one. But the men who'd seen them knew better. It wasn't about armor or firepower. It was about capability. About the casual confidence of soldiers who knew that if things went bad, they could leave, could reposition, could be somewhere else in minutes. Italian and German soldiers, meanwhile, waited for trucks that might come, marched when they didn't, fought from positions they couldn't abandon without risking chaos. The Jeep didn't just transport soldiers, it transported possibility. One captured Italian officer during his interrogation said something the American translator found strange enough to record. "You don't understand. It's not that we couldn't fight your Jeeps. We could. We had the weapons. But when we saw them, when we saw how easily you moved, we knew the war was already lost because you had more of everything, but especially that, especially freedom." The translator wrote in his report, Subject became emotional discussing enemy vehicles, unclear if this represents genuine sentiment or attempt to manipulate. But it was genuine, because the Jeep had become more than transportation. It had become an idea. The idea that the modern world belonged to those who could move through it, that stasis was death and motion was life, that the future would be won not by the strongest, but by the most adaptable. The American Creed on Wheels. Sergeant Mike Donovan, 3rd Infantry Division, names his Jeep Lucky Lady. Private James Washington paints Memphis Belle on his, though he's from Detroit. Corporal Eddie Kowalski puts a pair of fuzzy dice on his mirror and a pinup girl on the dashboard. The Army technically forbids personalization. The vehicles are military property, not personal possessions. But the rules are ignored from the top down because command understands something important. These decorations matter. They transform machinery into personality. They make a tool into a companion. And men fight harder when they're not alone. The Jeep becomes a canvas for American character. Soldiers paint names, hometowns, girlfriends' initials. They attach good luck charms, rabbit feet, saint medals, photographs. They modify them with extra ammo storage, improvised armor, creative weapons mounts. No two are exactly alike. That's the point. In authoritarian armies, uniformity is virtue. Deviation is punished. Soldiers are interchangeable parts in a grand machine. The American military, for all its discipline, never quite manages to suppress individuality. Doesn't really want to. The brass knows that initiative wins battles, and initiative requires a certain independence of spirit. So they let the men paint their Jeeps. Let them tinker. Let them figure out better ways to do things. And those small freedoms matter. A French civilian, watching the liberation of his village in 1944, writes, "The German vehicles were impressive, large, powerful, terrifying, but they all looked the same. When the Americans came, their little cars were decorated like carnival wagons. Names, pictures, colors. At first, I thought they were not serious soldiers. Then I understood they were serious enough to laugh, and an army that can laugh is an army that has already won." The Jeep embodies American contradictions, ordered but improvisational, disciplined but casual, deadly serious but fundamentally optimistic. It's a weapon that looks friendly, a military vehicle that civilians cheer for. In Europe, as the Allies push east, children run after Jeeps. They wave, they shout for chocolate and chewing gum, they ask for rides. The soldiers, when they can, oblige. There's a photograph, famous in its time, of a Jeep in France, summer 1944. 2 GIs in front. In back, 4 French kids, faces split in enormous grins. Behind them, smoke still rising from a recent battle. In front of them, freedom. The caption reads, "The car that won the war." It's hyperbole, of course. Wars aren't won by single vehicles. They're won by industry, strategy, sacrifice, and chance. But if you had to choose one object to represent the Allied victory, you could do worse than the Jeep, because it represents more than mobility. It represents possibility, the belief that problems have solutions, that ingenuity beats tradition, that the future belongs to those who can adapt, improvise, and move forward. Act 4. Reflections and Legacy. After the dust. Giuseppe Rossi goes home to Sicily in 1946. The war is over. Mussolini is dead. Italy is rebuilding, slowly, from ruins. Rossi returns to his village, to the olive groves his family has tended for generations. He marries his childhood sweetheart. He becomes a father. Life moves on. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, his children ask him about the war. They've heard stories from other men: battles, wounds, heroism, fear. They expect the same from their father. Instead, he tells them about a car. It was small, he says. Smaller than you'd think. Open top, 4 wheels. Made this sound like... He makes a purring noise in his throat, smiling at the memory. Like a very satisfied cat. His children don't understand why this matters. A car is a car. No, he says gently. This was different. We'd been fighting with mules and broken trucks, rifles from before I was born. We'd been told we were modern soldiers, but we were like farmers playing dress-up. And then these Americans came, and they had these little cars that could go anywhere, fast, happy-sounding. And the men driving them, they were free. That's the word, free. But you lost, his daughter says, confused. Why does that make you smile? Rosie considers this. How to explain? Because, he finally says, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about seeing what was possible. Before that day, I thought the world was small, fixed. You had what you had, and that was that. But the Jeep showed me something else. It showed me that people could build things that just worked, that took you places, that made life bigger. He doesn't tell them about the surrender, about climbing into the Jeep for the ride to the POW processing center, feeling the engine's vibration through the seat, watching the landscape blur past faster than he'd ever moved on land, about the strange joy he'd felt, even as a prisoner. But he thinks about it. All across post-war Europe, former soldiers share similar memories, not about the Jeep as an enemy weapon, but as a symbol, an ambassador for a different way of being. Many buy American vehicles after the war, if they can afford them. Others work on farms where surplus Jeeps have been sold for agricultural use. They learn to maintain them, repair them, adapt them for peaceful purposes. The vehicle that helped them defeat them becomes, in time, a friend. Archival footage from 1947. A French farmer plowing his field behind a converted Jeep. A Greek fisherman using one to haul mats. Italian construction workers moving supplies. German aid workers delivering medicine to remote villages. The weapons of war become the tools of peace. And in that transformation, there's a kind of redemption. The machine that changed men. History remembers generals and maps. It marks battles with dates and casualty counts. It builds monuments to the fallen and museums for the weapons. But sometimes the things that matter most are smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. A spark plug, a wheel, an idea. The Jeep didn't win World War II alone. No single machine could. Wars are won by millions of decisions, sacrifices, accidents of fate and geography. But the Jeep changed how that war was fought. And in changing how it was fought, it changed who fought it. And in changing who fought it, it changed what came after. Before the Jeep, armies moved at the speed of walking. Generals planned campaigns around roads, railways, supply depots. Territory was conquered meter by meter, held with static defenses. The Jeep made war fluid. Battles became dynamic. Front lines blurred. Mobility wasn't just an advantage, it was the advantage. And that lesson didn't stay on the battlefield. After the war, as soldiers returned home, they brought with them a new understanding of what was possible. They'd seen how American industry could produce millions of vehicles quickly and reliably. They'd experienced what it meant to have freedom of movement, to go where you wanted when you wanted. They wanted that for themselves. The post-war era becomes the age of the automobile. Highways stretch across continents. Suburbs sprawl. The whole architecture of modern life reorganizes around personal mobility. It's not just the Jeep, of course, but the Jeep planted the seed. The idea that everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the elite, could have their own vehicle, could travel, could be mobile. Democracy on wheels. The 20th century becomes the century of motion, of highway systems and road trips and drive-in movies, of racing and trucking and cross-country wandering, of motorcycles and RVs and the open road as metaphor for freedom itself. And at the root of it all, in some small way, is that little quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle. That machine built in 60 hours to solve a military problem that became, almost by accident, a symbol, not just of American power, but of human ingenuity, of the ability to solve problems with creativity and speed, of the democratic impulse to give everyone access to what matters. The Jeep didn't just cross battlefields, it crossed centuries. From the static world of empires and fixed positions and knowing your place, to the mobile world of possibility and change and choosing your own path. That's a bigger victory than any battle. That's the kind of victory that reshapes everything that comes after. The fade out. Return in your mind to that Sicilian road, July 1943. The dust has settled now. The surrender is long over. The Americans have moved on, pushing north toward Messina, then mainland Italy, then Rome, then the Alps beyond. But the memory remains. In the exact spot where Giuseppe Rossi first saw the Jeeps crest the hill, a historical marker now stands. Bronze plaque, modest. It marks the location of an Allied landing, mentions casualty figures, dates the liberation of the island. It doesn't mention the Jeeps. But locals know the stories. They pass them down, grandmother to grandchild, teacher to student. The day the future arrived in their village, the day the old world gave way to the new. An old man sits near the marker, watching the road. His grandson plays nearby, pushing a toy car through the dust, making engine sounds. Vroom, vroom. The old man smiles. He remembers being 6 years old, remembers the sound of engines in the distance, remembers American soldiers tossing candy to children, remembers most clearly the Jeeps, so small, so alive, so impossibly modern. "What are you thinking about, Nano?" the boy asks. "The future," the old man says, "when it first arrived." The boy doesn't understand, but that's okay. He will someday. Everyone does eventually. We all have our moment when we realize the world is bigger than we thought, when we touch something that opens up possibility, when we see what might be. For millions of people across dozens of countries spanning years of conflict and decades of memory, that moment came in the form of a vehicle. A humble, practical, profoundly democratic machine that carried more than soldiers and supplies, that carried hope. Somewhere far from Sicily now, a Jeep rolls down a dusty road. Maybe it's in a museum lovingly restored. Maybe it's still working on a farm or a construction site, 70 years old and still going. Maybe it's in a photograph, black and white, soldiers grinning, victory still ahead, but confidence already present. Or maybe it's just in memory. The sound of that engine, the feel of motion, the wind in your face, and the road stretching ahead. The war moved on. The soldiers went home. The battles were won and lost and recorded in history books. But the feeling it left behind, that speed, that freedom, that sense of possibility, never stopped. It's still rolling now, down roads not yet built, toward futures not yet imagined. The engine hums, the wheels turn, and somewhere, always, someone is seeing it for the first time, stopping in their tracks, unable to look away. Because they're not just seeing a machine, they're seeing what comes next.